Hello and welcome to Marks & Clark's Blurred Lines podcast series. I'm Robecca Davey, Chartered Trademark Attorney and Senior Associate at Marks & Clark, and throughout this series we'll delve into intriguing and evolving subjects in the intersection of fashion and intellectual property for 2024. Our discussions will span diverse topics such as the rise of NFTs, the expansive world of the metaverse, and the pivotal role of AI in shaping the industry. Each episode will feature insights from a spectrum of experts in the fashion realm, along with special guests from within Marks & Clark, providing unique perspectives on these compelling themes. So without further delay, let's embark on this week's episode. Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to be discussing data security and privacy and its impact on the fashion industry. My name is Robecca Davey and I'm a Senior Associate and Trademark Attorney at Marks & Clark. I'm co-hosting today with Joh of Spatialite. Joh, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Becca. I'm Joh Orengo, and I'm the founder and CEO of Spatialite, and we help brands with XR and metaverse and spatial computing technologies and help them solve their business problems.
So, thanks, Joh. Today we've got a really interesting and relevant subject to discuss, and we've got a fantastic expert to do this with, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. But we're going to look through some of the core data security and privacy principles and the current landscape in this field. And we're also going to look at the impacts that these considerations might have or are likely to have on our fashion clients and content creators in general, and what action they should be taking to protect themselves. We're also going to touch on some data security and privacy considerations relating to the metaverse. But who better to discuss this with you than our very own Simon Portman. Simon is a colleague of mine at Marks & Clark. So, Simon, you're an absolute expert in this field. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, yeah, lovely to be described in that way, Becca. I'm Simon Portman. I'm of counsel at Marks & Clark, and I give advice to clients on contractual issues for protecting and commercialising and developing their products and technology. I head up the firm's XR team, which is how I met Joh. When I realised he was involved in Finland in the same sector. And I also ended up giving advice to clients on compliance with GDPR when it came in. So the topic we're talking about today is a very convenient convergence of two of the areas I operate in, and it's an interesting illustration of how different legal principles and different industry areas are now converging as we get more digital transformation in all sectors.
Exactly. So, Simon, can you give us a summary of the core principles of data security and privacy and how they might differ from region to region or country to country?
Yeah, probably that the leader in this is the EU, and that there was concern that people's personal data, and by that I mean data that you can use to identify an individual, such as their name, contact details, medical details, beliefs, financial details, appearance, that they were being used in transactions, that data might be ending up with people that they did not want it to end up with. It might end up being used for purposes they did not sign off on. So that might mean that you buy a product from one organisation, but then you find your details have gone to another, and that's been used to target you, or that you're a victim of identity theft or of hacking, and as a result of that, blackmail and so forth. So the basis of all these regimes is to define when and how much people's personal data can be used, whether that be as a customer, an employee, a patient, or whatever. And so there are a few core principles there that, firstly, you should only be using someone's data to the extent necessary to perform your obligations to them, that you're going to be transparent about what you're doing with it and where it goes, that you limit that use purely to what you need it for, that if you're going to do anything more than that, you get consent, that you don't use more data than you have to, that you don't keep it any longer than you have to, that you keep it secure, both in contractual and technical terms, and you'll be accountable if you breach any of those requirements. And that's why we've seen a few high-profile big fines, often of social media organisations or banks or hospitals, where they have either used data beyond what's permitted under regulations, or they've been hacked because they didn't have suitable security in place. So certainly the EU probably has the most advanced and strictest regime in this regard, and so does the UK, because the UK took it on board when it was in the EU. So the fact that we're no longer in the EU doesn't get us off the hook there. US has a different regime from state to state. Certainly California is pretty strict, like Europe, and Canada is following suit there. Other US states are a bit more relaxed, and you can see a similar regime in Singapore and Switzerland. China tightened up its regulations towards the end of 2021, and if anyone's seen, China's stance on the regulation of AI also has a big privacy element in it, because of course what AI means is that personal data can be processed at a much bigger rate, and things can be done with it that are much harder to track, and that is producing a real challenge for the principle of transparency under data protection legislation.
Well, so then if we kind of take it from that general and look a little more specific at the topic at hand, which is how this impacts your clients in the fashion industry. So, like, what is Marks and Clark seeing your fashion clients do in this regard? Like, what kind of trends are emerging?
Well, I think that they are. I think companies are getting concerned by this because consumers are and lawmakers are. And because that means that they're worried they're going to lose custom, and that if laws come in that they breach, they're going to get fined. Now, obviously, fashion is just, in terms of it being like any other retail, they are going to be processing the details of customers, and that means contact details, payment details, and so forth. Furthermore, if we're now getting into the personalized retailing, where people are uploading their image, their body type, and so forth, then you're getting a whole other area of personal data which is being uploaded. Also, when you're getting into avatars that look like them as well. So you're opening out there a whole new area of potential misuse of personal data, identity theft, and so forth. So certainly, in the same way as happens with GDPR, in terms of social media and banks and medical details, and it's probably going to happen with AI as well. There are big fines creeping in for misuse of data. So back in 2022, the beauty brand Sephora paid a settlement of $1.2 million because it had been selling customers' data. And that's something it should have known it shouldn't be doing. It's basically where you get the data, the understanding from the customer is that the only entity holding that data is you, and you're just using it to sell things to that customer. What they don't want to find is that you're flogging it off to other companies, so suddenly they're getting spammed, possibly by companies that have a low level of security. And in recognition of this, at the last New York Fashion Week, in fact, Washington policymakers hosted 2 privacy events. Now, you don't normally see government hosting events at something like fashion with a regulation-heavy theme. So I think companies are going to start listening. They will probably really start listening if there are a few more fines, but since data is going to be increasingly fueling the sector, as it is any other sector, any other retail sector, where when it comes to the digitization of transactions, and the fact that fashion is one of the areas that really is moving into the metaverse, I think it is inevitable.
Simon, I was just going to touch on that as we were talking. It kind of just popped into my head, and I hate to drop the M word so early in the podcast. But what do you think the key considerations are for our clients, or just content creators in general, when they enter the metaverse, in terms of all that data that you're kind of putting out there? What are key considerations in the metaverse for our clients and people to have?
By our clients, you mean the retailers and so forth?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that firstly, they've got to make sure that they have all the policies and procedures in place in terms of what data they're going to be processing of their clients. And as I said, where it's going to end up, if it's going to be hosted elsewhere, they need to say so. They need to have privacy policies. They need to have those elements also built into their terms of sale. If clients are going to be uploading personal details like body type, appearance, crafting avatars and so forth, giving away their geolocation, but biometric data, they may even be, conceivably, particularly as we're now getting into the whole idea of, diversity and inclusion in the metaverse and in fashion, that might mean that someone with a medical condition is necessarily uploading elements of that, because that's going to be accommodated in the clothes that they want to try and they're going to buy. And medical data is a category of sensitive personal data where the threshold of compliance is even higher. So all this will need accommodating in procedures and contracts. Also, it means that you actually have to have technically the security in place, so that the data doesn't end up being unprotected, or you don't get hacked or so forth. So they're going to need to work with their lawyers and their IT people to make sure that they have the policies and procedures in place, and that actually in real life they actually comply with them. Because it's not much use having all that stuff in place if it's just box ticking and you actually don't do any of it. I think that the challenge is going to be that because fashion is necessarily quite a creative sector, you tend to find sometimes that the more creative sectors can be a bit more blasé about compliance in this regard. But in the same way that, the use of essentially computer games technology in the terms of XR, once it ended up being used in things like the medical field, or training or education, suddenly it was finding a whole load of regulations and other sectors were impacting on it. I think fashion is going to find the same thing. So it's going to have to, import in a number of skill sets in order to comply with all this.
That's so super interesting. Thank you so much, Simon. We kind of touched on it, but are there any things that clients can do to kind of protect themselves? I know you've kind of touched on that briefly in kind of what we were just last speaking about, but is there anything else, any technical solutions, anything like that they could be thinking about before they kind of go into this?
Well, I think that I'm not an IT person, but certainly, obviously, they need to have make sure that they're securely hosted. There is a certain amount of worry about the cloud, but generally the cloud is pretty secure. They need to make sure that all their staff are made aware of the issues, that they've got the relevant software in place technically. I think also that remember that the customers also need to take care in terms of how they will protect themselves. So, they need to limit the amount of personal information they disclose. be aware of when you might be having a hacking or a phishing attack. Make sure that your own antivirus software and firmware are up to date. Be careful where you use your headset as well, because where AR headsets have sensors and cameras on them, that means that someone might have a grandstand view of your bedroom. Now, anyone who sees what my bedroom looks like could find they're facing a major trauma, but you've got to be very careful about these things.
Oh
I
my
think
gosh,
so.
that's crazy.
So yeah, I think that it's a job for customers as well as sellers, and I think people are getting pretty aware of how they need to protect themselves in other areas. And we've had I think people, just in the way that people ended up being scammed by NFT tricksters, and they're now learning to what to look out for. I think probably retailers rely more and more on online and buyers rely more on online transactions, and a VR element are going to learn the ropes.
No, I think you're 100% right, and I think it's like you said earlier. I think it's a real thing that can fall by the wayside a little bit. But if you don't make sure this is all tightened up, and you're kind of protected on this side, and you've got all your ducks in a row, it could really be a big pitfall for a lot of people. So I think making sure that the data security side of things is kind of shored up is definitely a key consideration for people in the fashion industry. Simon, you've been so insightful. Thank you so much for talking to us about this today. I don't know if you've got anything else to ask, Joe, but from me, you've just answered so many questions. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate it as well. I did have one question. Have you noticed any difference between the big brands and some of the startups that you work with in this area, or has it kind of been across the board, some of the same kind of issues?
I think the awareness of the issues is inevitably more among the big companies than the small startups, simply because they're already operating in internationally and heavily regulated environments. But I think, Joe, as you and I know, having seen a lot of startups kick off in the XR space generally, they can be somewhat naive about the legal issues and the IP issues and the regulatory issues, particularly the ones that are in the sort of content generation rather than the software or the hardware field. So in the same way that if I make and sell a computer game, which involves a certain amount of hand-eye coordination, and you're using a headset, and therefore you're moving around and using your arms and legs in a simulated sports environment. That's the game. If I use that to suddenly, to diagnose or treat dementia or a stroke patient, suddenly it's a medical device, even if it's a low-level classification one, and they're in a whole different arena there. I think in the same way that companies will, small startups, there is a lot that they're going to have to learn. So I think any fashion startup that is going to get into this arena is going to want to start talking to people with the requisite legal and IT expertise as soon as possible. Another thing to bear in mind is that, because if you get any of this wrong, it could be expensive, is talk to insurers. You can get specialist cybersecurity insurance brokers. And the thing about insurance is, it's like other expertise, is if you go to an insurance broker that operates in that specific field of expertise, they will be able to give you good risk management advice. They will also be able to put you in touch with the best deals in terms of coverage and premiums. And also, because they've given you good risk management advice, you will be a better risk and the premiums will be lower. So one thing I find with startups often is they can get quite a long way down the road in terms of being customer facing before they've got any insurance. But cybersecurity insurance is one of the blossoming areas in that sector at the moment, inevitably.
Great advice. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been so lovely to chat to you. Thank you very
Likewise,
much.
lovely to take part.
Thanks for listening. For more information on all of these topics and to listen to all the episodes so far in the series, make sure to visit our Fashion Hub on the Marks & Clark website. You can find the link in the bio of this episode. See you again next time on the Blurred Lines podcast.